Hi, and welcome to Miss Lee Reads. It's me, Mrs. Lee, and I am reading Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. Today is chapter 3. And the reason why I'm doing it today is because my mom was just like, hey, where's my Harry Potter chapter for today? I was like, the kids are on break. And she was like, I don't care about no kids. I'm your mama. I want my chapter. So I was like, okay, mom, I'll give you your chapter. So here we go. Chapter 3, The Burrow. All right. Here we go. Oh, look, there's a cute. Hmm. If I was to infer, what would I think? By reading the Burrow, and then I was like, there's a car flying in the air. Make your inference, please. When you infer, you take what you see and partner it with your schema. Your schema is everything that you already know. It's what's inside your head. It's all that stuff that's in your brain. Your schema. Little reading lesson. Okay, I miss teaching the kids. All right, so the burrow. And you know what? Rabbits burrow. So, are they going to take a car into like a rabbit hole? I don't know. But right now, as I'm thinking, I feel like I'm going down the rabbit hole, just like Alice. Okay, here we go. Chapter 3. Ron! Breathed Harry, creeping to the window and pushing it up so he could talk through the bars. Ron, how did you? What the? Harry's mouth fell open as the full impact of what he was seeing hit him. Ron was leaning out of the back window of an old turquoise car, which was parked in mid-air. Grinning at Harry from the front seats were Fred and George, Ron's elder twin brothers. All right, Harry, asked George. I don't know their voices yet, so they'll come to me. What's been going on? Said Ron. Why haven't you been answering my letters? I asked you to stay about 12 times, and then Dad came home and said you'd got an official warning for using magic in front of muggles. It wasn't me. And how did you know? He works for the ministry, said Ron. You know, we're not supposed to do spells outside of school. You should talk, said Harry, staring at the floating car. This doesn't count, said Ron. We're only borrowing this. It's Dad's. It's Dad's. We didn't enchant it, but doing magic in front of those muggles you live with? I told you, I didn't. But it'll take too long to explain now. Look, can you tell them at Hogwarts that the Dursleys have locked me up and won't let me come back? And obviously, I can't magic myself out because the ministry will think that the second spell I've done in 3 days. So, stop gibbering, said Ron. We've come to take you home with us. But you can't make me out either. We don't need to, said Ron, jerking his head toward the front seat and grinning. You forgot who I've got with me. Tie that around the bar, said Fred, throwing the end of a rope to Harry. If the Dursleys wake up, I'm dead, said Harry as he tied the rope tightly around a bar, and Fred revved the car. Don't worry, said Fred, and stand back. Harry moved back into the shadows next to Hedwig, who seemed to have realized how important this was and kept still and silent. The car revved louder and louder, and suddenly, with a crunching noise, the bars were pulled clean out of the window as Fred drove straight up in the air. Harry ran back to the window to see the bars dangling a few feet above the ground. Panting, Ron hoisted them up into the car. Harry listened anxiously, but there was no sound from the Dursleys' bedroom. When the bars were safely in the back seat with Ron, Fred reversed as close as possible to Harry's window. Get in, Ron said. But all my Hogwarts stuff, my wand, my broomstick, where is it? Locked in the cupboard on the stairs, and I can't get out of this room. No problem, said George from the front passenger seat. Out of the way, Harry. Fred and George climbed cat-like through the window into Harry's room. You had to hand it to him, thought Harry, as George took an ordinary hairpin from his pocket and started to pick the lock. A lot of wizards think it's a waste of time knowing this sort of muggle trick, said Fred, but we feel their skills worth learning, even if they're a bit slow. There was a small click, and the door swung open. So we'll get your trunk. You grab anything you need from your room and hand it out to Ron, whispered George. Watch out for the bottom stair. It creaks, Harry whispered, back as the twins disappeared onto the dark landing. Harry dashed around the room, collecting his things and passing them out the window to Ron. Then he went to help Fred and George heave his trunk up the stairs. Harry heard Uncle Vernon. At last, panting, they reached the landing, then carried the trunk through Harry's room to the open window. Fred climbed back into the car to pull with Ron, and Harry and George pushed from the bedroom side, inch by inch. The trunk slid through the window. Uncle Vernon coughed again. You know, if you cough now, everybody thinks you got the Rona, right? A bit more, panted Fred, who was pulling from inside the car. One good push. Harry and George threw their shoulders against the trunk, and it slid out of the window and into the backseat of the car. Okay, let's go, George whispered. But as Harry climbed to the windowsill, there came a sudden, loud screech from behind him, followed immediately by the thunder of Uncle Vernon's voice. That's ready, Al. I've forgotten Hedwig. Harry tore back across the room as the landing light clicked on. He snatched up Hedwig's dashed up to the window, and passed out to Ron. He was scrambling back onto the chest of drawers when Uncle Vernon hammered on the unlocked door, and it crashed open. For a split second, Uncle Vernon stood framed in the doorway. Then he let out a bellow like an angry bull and dived at Harry, grabbing him by the ankle. Ron, Fred, and George seized Harry's arm and pulled as hard as they could. Petunia! Roared Uncle Vernon. He's getting away! He's getting away! But the Weasleys gave a gigantic tug, and Harry's legs slid out of Uncle Vernon's grasp. Harry was in the car. He slammed the door shut. Put your foot down, Fred, yelled Ron, and the car shot suddenly toward the moon. Harry couldn't believe it. He was free. He rolled down the window. Oh, bing! The night air whipping his hair. And looked back at the shrinking rooftops of Privet Drive. Uncle Vernon, Aunt Petunia, and Dudley were all hanging, dumbstruck, out of Harry's window. See you next summer, Harry yelled. The Weasleys roared with laughter. I love figurative language. And Harry settled back in his seat, grinning from ear to ear. Let Hedwig out, he told Ron. She can fly behind us. She hasn't had a chance to stretch her wings for ages. George handed the hairpin to Ron, and a moment later, Hedwig soared joyfully out of the window to glide alongside them like a ghost. So, what's the story, Harry? Said Ron impatiently. What's been happening? Harry told them all about Dobby, the warning he'd given Harry, and the fiasco of the violet pudding. There was a long, shocked silence when he had finished. Very fishy, said Fred finally. Definitely dodgy, agreed George. So he wouldn't even tell you who's supposed to be plotting all of this stuff. I don't think he could, said Harry. I told you, every time he got close to letting something slip, he started banging his head against the wall. He saw Fred and George look at each other. What? You think he was lying to me? Said Harry. Well, said Fred, put it this way. How's the elves have got powerful magic of their own, but they can't usually use it without their master's permission. I reckon old Dobby was sent to stop you coming back to Hogwarts. Someone's idea of a joke. Can you think of anyone at school with a grudge against you? Yes, said Harry and Ron together instantly. Draco Malfoy, said Harry. Harry explained. He hates me. Draco Malfoy, said George, turning around. Not Lucius Malfoy's son. Must be. It's a very Must be. It must be a very common. It's not a very common name, is it? Said Harry. Why? I've heard Dad talking about him, said George. He was a big supporter of you, know who. And then you know who disappeared, said Fred, craning around to look at Harry. Lucius Malfoy came back saying he'd never meant any of it. Load of dung. Daddy reckons he was right in you-know-who's inner circle. Harry had heard these rumors about Malfoy's family before, and they didn't surprise him at all. Malfoy made Dudley Dursley look like a kind, thoughtful, and sensitive boy. I don't know whether the Malfoys own a house elf, said Harry. Well, whoever owns him will be an old wizarding family, and they'll be rich. Yeah, Mum's always wishing we had a house elf to do the ironing, said George, but all we got is a lazy old ghoul in the attic and gnomes all over the garden. House elves come with big old manors and castles and places like that. You don't catch one in our house. Harry was silent. Judging by the fact that the Draco Malfoy usually had the best of everything, his family was rolling in wizard of gold. Bing! He could just see Malfoy strutting around a large manor house. Sending the family servant to stop Harry from going back to Hogwarts also sounded exactly like the sort of thing Malfoy would do. Had Harry been stupid to take Dobby seriously? I'm glad we came to get you anyway, said Ron. I was getting really worried when you didn't answer any of my letters. I thought it was Errol's fault at first. Who's Errol? Oh, Al. He's ancient. It wouldn't be the first time he'd called out something at delivery. So then I tried to borrow Hermes. Who? The owl Mom and Dad brought Percy when he was made prefect, said Fred from the front. But Percy wouldn't lend him to me, said Ron. Said he needed him. Percy's been acting very oddly this summer, said George. Auntie has been sending a lot of letters and spending a load of time shut up in his room. I mean, there's only so many times you can polish a prefect badge. You're driving too fast. Too far west, Fred, he added, pointing at a compass on the dashboard. Fred twiddled the steering wheel. So, does your dad know you've got the car? Said Harry, guessing the answer. No, said Ron. He had to work tonight, so hopefully we'll be able to get it back in the garage without Mum noticing we flew it. What does your dad do at the Ministry of Magic anyway? He works in the most boring department, said Ron. The misuse of Muggle artifacts office. The what? It's all to do with bewitching things that are Muggle made. You know, in case they end up back in the Muggle shop or house. Like last year, some old witch died, and her tea was set was sold to an old antique shop. This Muggle woman bought it, took it home, and tried to serve her friends tea in it. It was a nightmare. Dad was working overtime for weeks. What happened? The teapot went berserk and squirted boiling tea all over the place, and one man ended up in the hospital with sugar tongs clamped to his nose. Dad was going frantic. It's only him and an old warlock called Perkins in the office, and they had to do memory charms and all sorts of stuff to cover it up. But your dad, this car. Fred laughed. Yeah, Dad's crazy about everything to do with Muggles. Our shed's full of Muggle stuff. He takes it apart, puts spells on it, and puts it back together again. If he raided our house, he'd have to put himself under arrest. It draws Mum mad. That's the main road, said George, peering down through the windshield. We'll be there in 10 minutes. Just well, it's getting light. A faint pinkish glow was visible along the horizon to the east. Fred brought the car lower, and Harry saw a dark patchwork of fields and clumps of trees. We're a little way outside the village, said George. Ottery Street catch full. Lower and lower went the flying car. The edge of a brilliant red sun was now gleaming through the trees. Bing! Touchdown, said Fred, as with a slight bump they hit the ground. They had landed next to a tumble-down garage in a small yard, and Harry looked out for the first time at Ron's house. It looked as though it had once been a large stone pig pen, but extra rooms had been added here and there, and until several stories high, and so crooked, it looked as though it were held up by magic, which, Harry reminded himself, it probably was. 4 or 5 chimneys were perched on top of the red roof, a lopsided sign stuck in the ground near the entrance road. The Burrow. Around the front door lay a jumble of rubber boots and a very rusty cauldron. Several fat brown chickens were pecking their way around the yard. It's not much, said Ron. It's wonderful, said Harry, happily thinking of Privet Drive. They got out the car. Now we'll go upstairs really quietly, said Fred, and wait for Mom to call us for breakfast. Then, Ron, you come bounding downstairs going, Mom, look who turned up in the night. And she'll be all pleased to see Harry, and no one need ever know we flew the car. Right, said Ron. Come on, Harry, I sleep at the top. Ron had gone a nasty greenish color, his eyes fixed on the house. The other three wheeled around. Mrs. Weasley was marching across the yard, scattering chickens, and for a short, plump, kind-faced woman, it was remarkable how much she looked like a saber-toothed tiger. Mom, like a tiger. Simile. Ah, said Fred. Oh, dear, said George. Mrs. Weasley came to a halt in front of them, her hands on her hips, staring from one guilty face to the next. She was wearing a flowered apron with the wand sticking out of the pocket. So, she said. Morning, Mom, said George in what he clearly thought was a jaunty, winning voice. Have you any idea how worried I've been? Said Mrs. Weasley in a desolate whisper. Sorry, Mom. Let's see, we had to. All three of Mr. Weasley's sons were taller than she was, but they cowered as her rage broke over them. Beds empty, no note, car gone, could have crashed out of my mind with worry. Did you, God? Never as long as I've lived. You wait until your father gets home. We never had trouble like this from Bill or Charlie or Percy. Perfect, Percy, muttered Fred. You could do with taking a leaf out of Percy's books, yelled Mrs. Weasley, prodding a finger in Fred's chest. You could have died. You could have been seen. You could have lost your father his job. It seemed to go on for hours. Mrs. Weasley had shouted herself hoarse before she turned on Harry, who backed away. Oh, I'm very pleased to see you, Harry, dear. She said, come in and have some breakfast. She turned and walked back into the house, and Harry, after a nervous glance at Ron, who nodded encouragingly, followed her. The kitchen was small and rather cramped. There was a big scrubbed wooden table and chairs in the middle, and Harry sat down on the edge of his seat, looking around. He had never been in a wizard house before. The clock on the wall opposite him had only one hand and no numbers at all. Written on the edge were things like, time to make tea, time to feed the chickens, and you're late. Books were stacked 3 deep on the mantelpiece, books with titles like Charm Your Own Cheese, Enchantment in Baking, and 1 Minute Feast. It's magic. And unless Harry's ears were deceiving him, the old radio next to the sink had just announced that coming up was Witching Hour with the popular singing sorceress Celestina Warbeck. Mrs. Weasley was clattering around, cooking breakfast a little haphazardly, throwing dirty looks at her sons as she threw sausages into the frying pan. Every now and then she muttered things like, don't know what you were thinking of, and never would have I believed it. I don't blame you, dear, she assured Harry, tipping 8 or 9 sausages onto his plate. Arthur and I have been worried about you, too. Just last night we were saying we'd come and get you ourselves if you hadn't written back to Ron by Friday. But really, she was now adding 3 fried eggs to his plate. Flying an illegal car halfway across the country. Anyone could have seen you. She flicked her wand casually at the dishes in the sink, which began to clean themselves, clicking gently in the background. It was cloudy, Mum, said Fred. You keep your mouth closed while you're eating, Mrs. Weasley snapped. They were starving him, Mum, said George. And you said Mrs. Weasley, but it was with a slightly softened expression that she started cutting Harry bread and buttering it for him. At that moment, there was a diversion in front in the form of a small red-headed figure in a long night dress who appeared in the kitchen, gave a squeal, and ran out again. Ginny, said Ron in an undertone to Harry, my sister, she's been talking about you all summer. Yeah, she'll be wanting your autograph, Harry, Fred said with a grin, but he caught his mother's eye and bent his face over his plate without another word. Nothing more was said until all 4 plates were clean, which took a surprisingly short time. Blimey, I'm tired, yawned Fred, setting down his knife and fork at last. I think I'll go to bed and— You will not, snapped Mrs. Weasley. It's your own fault. You've been up all night. You're going to dename the garden for me. They're getting completely out of hand. Oh, Mom, and you too, she said, glaring at Ron and Fred. You go to bed, dear. You go to bed, dear, she added to Harry. You didn't ask them to fly that wretched car. But Harry, who felt wide awake, said quickly, I hope, Ron, I've never seen a denoming. That's very sweet of you, dear, but it still works, said Mrs. Weasley. Now let's see what Lockhart's got to say on the subject. And she pulled a heavy book from the stack on the mantelpiece. George groaned, Mum, we know how to denome a garden. Harry looked at the cover of Mrs. Weasley's book. Written across it in fancy gold letters were the words Gilderoy Lockhart's Guide to Household Pets. There was a big photograph on the front of a very good-looking wizard with wavy blonde hair and bright blue eyes. As always in the wizarding world, the photograph was moving. The wizard who Harry supposed was Gilderoy Lockhart kept winking cheekily up at them. Mrs. Weasley beamed down at him. Oh, he is marvelous, she said. He knows his household pets. All right, it's a wonderful book. Mum fancies him, said Fred in a very audible whisper. Don't be so ridiculous, Fred, said Mrs. Weasley, her cheeks rather pink. All right, if you think you know better than Lockhart, you can go and get on with it. And woe besides you if there's a single gnome in that garden when I come out to inspect it. Yawning and grumbling, the Weasleys slouched outside with Harry behind them. The garden was large, and in Harry's eyes, exactly what a garden should be. The Dursleys wouldn't have liked it. There were plenty of weeds, and the grass needed cutting, but there were gnarled trees all around the walls, plants Harry had never seen spilling from every flower bed, and a big green pond full of frogs. Muggles have garden gnomes too, you know, Harry told Ron as they crossed the lawn. Yeah, I've seen those things. I've seen those things they think are gnomes, said Ron, bent double with his head in a peony bush. Like fat little Santa Clauses, like fishing rods. There was a violent scuffling noise. The peony bush shuddered, and Ron straightened up. This is a gnome, he said grimly. Get off me, squealed the gnome. It was certain nothing like Santa Claus. It was small and leathery looking, with a large, knobby, bald head exactly like a potato. Ron held it at arm's length as it kicked out at him with its horny little feet. He grasped it around the ankles and turned it upside down. This is what you have to do, he said. He raised the gnome above his head. Get off me, and started to swing it in great circles like a lasso. Seeing the shocked look on Harry's face, Ron added, It doesn't hurt them. You've just got to make them really dizzy so that they can't find their way back to their gnome holes. He let go of the gnome's ankles. It flew 20 feet in the air and landed with a thud in the field over the hedge. Oops, I forgot I have something in the oven, so pause.